Welcome to the final session of our Pride at Work conference. I'm coming to you from Dublin Castle, and I can't believe I'm the only one here wearing a mask. And it's also an opportunity for me to show off and give a shameless plug to our Dublin Pride Queer Culture Collaborative Exhibition. So if you happen to be within a 5-kilometre radius of Temple Bar, you can go down. The exhibition is still on at the former film base unit on Curve Street. Huge thanks to Chris, who's been your host for the day and has been amazing and wonderful as always. Our last session, again, we're looking at practical help and support for people. I'm all dressed up in my suit from a job interview. I'm not sure do you wear a suit anymore, or I don't even know how you write a CV these days, which is why we have teamed up with our wonderful sponsors and partners from Indeed and the iPride group within Indeed to give us some practical help on career coaching. So I'm going to hand it over to our iPride team at Indeed. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jed, for that wonderful introduction. And it is great to be here with everyone today. So thank you so much for having us. And firstly, a big shout out to Dublin Pride and the whole team behind this year's Winter Pride. I don't know about you guys, but I've been able to dip in and out of a few different sessions over the last 2 days, and they have been phenomenal. So thank you so much. But welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for the career coaching session today. So we know it's been a tough year for a lot of folks out there, and so we hope with today's session we can help, particularly for those who might have found themselves maybe unexpectedly out of work. Maybe you're just beginning to look at your first job, or maybe you're just looking to get some good tips and advice for the next time you want to apply. So as we go through today's session, we'll encourage you all, please submit questions. We will try and get through some of them during the session. And if we don't, we'll be having an expert panel at the end who'll be able to answer some of your questions. So to kick off, we want to just give you a quick introduction. So I'm Leanne. I'm the Global Program Manager at Indeed, and I'm part of the leadership team at iPride. So being a member of the community and also working at a company whose mission is we help people get jobs, which you might see a little bit on my t-shirt, is fantastic to be able to be here to really bring both that mission and my own personal values and be able to hopefully help. Personally, I've got about 10 years experience in recruiting, and I've worked for Indeed for about 6 years. So I know the recruiting world fairly well at this stage, so hopefully I can share some words of wisdom. And from my own background, I studied accounting and finance. I worked in retail and fell into recruiting and just loved it, so stuck around with it. But please don't ever ask me what I want to be doing in 5 years. I hate that interview question. It is not my forte, but hopefully I can share some other words of wisdom. And I'll pass you over to my colleague, Joaquin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here. Thanks for having us, Dublin Pride. So yes, my name is Joaquin. I'm working at Indeed in the sales strategy team. I'm with Indeed for over 6 years now, and I'm the site lead for iPride Dublin. I use him and his pronouns, and on the sales strategy team, I'm a people manager. So I will be wearing that hat sometimes as like a hiring manager. But 10 years ago, I moved from Belgium to Ireland. I moved to Ireland for love, but I needed a job. I know it doesn't sound very romantic if I'm going to say that you can't live out of love. So I was in your seat about 10 years ago looking for a job around here. So I could have used this session in fairness. I would also say of myself that I'm a bit of a career change rock star, because originally I graduated as a chef, but the hospitality industry was not really something for me. So I moved on to tourism, the aviation industry, and from there rolled into the tech industry. I did have a break for 3 years to lead an NGO for LGBTQI plus rights in Belgium. So I had a bit of a career break or a career change there as well. So yeah, that's it about me. Yeah, the rockstar part, it's not something I would put on a CV. We use different words than that, but this is not an interview. As you can see, I'm also wearing the t-shirt of Indeed. We help people get jobs. which I think is a great mission. And that's what makes it so great to be here today, because this is really something that aligns with our mission. And it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy working for Indeed and doing what I do for the moment. So yeah, Leanne, tell us what to expect today.
Thanks, Joachim. So after today's session, what we really want to have achieved is for you all to be able to walk away with some practical, tangible steps that you can take when looking for your next job. We're going to share some good practices and hopefully increase your knowledge of the recruiting process so that you do feel better prepared when it comes to your job search. But I'll turn it over to Joachim just to give a little bit of background on ourselves as well.
Yeah, thanks, Leanne. I thought it was important to kind of tell you guys that, we're here because we're part of iPride. iPride is the Inclusion Resource Group, IRG. There was a session yesterday, I think, on employee networks. So it's one of our employee networks within the company. We call them IRGs. You might hear in other companies that they're called affinity groups. Other companies might call them BRGs, business resource groups. It might be important when you start prospecting companies or researching companies you would work for. If you see this mentioned that they would have them or have some of them, it means that, first of all, that they have the diversity, inclusion, and belonging team, but that it's also one of their values. So if that's important to you, then you know kind of what to look out for. So iPride is the IRG for the LGBTQI plus community, where we want to create a sense of belonging for the LGBT crowd within Indeed, but also do outreach out of Indeed. So that's actually why we're here today. We have a couple of other ones. We have BIG, BIG, for example, Black Inclusion Group. We have an Asian network. We have Women at. We have AGE, which is All Generations Empowered. We have Access, which is around disability. And probably a couple more. We have VATS and Allies, but that's not the case in Dublin, but we have that in the US. So there's different IRGs. Anyway, I just wanted to say that this is not Leanne and myself's day job. We know we breathe and live this content, but speaking at these type of conferences is not really our day job. So just giving you that.
Good background. Yeah, I will agree with that. We're not here to plug Indeed. I can promise you that, folks. So I know some of you have probably attended a number of sessions today. And like I said earlier, there is going to be a lot of information. So what I would highly recommend is if you can maybe take down 1 or 2 main points per section that we go through today. So whether you want to jot them down with a pen and paper, go old school, grab your phone, whatever works, it will be probably the most helpful approach. But we will be able to share out some content, and this is being recorded as well, so will be available afterwards. But for today, we are going to be taking a whistle-stop tour of 6 main sections. So firstly, we're going to give you some insights into how to prepare. So we'll talk about the information that you're going to need, where you're going to find it, and what tools you can leverage before you actually start building out your CV. Next up, once you've got that prep done, we'll dive into the CV itself. So once you know what you want to put in your CV, we'll show you how you can structure it and format it, because we all know that is a very vital piece of paper. And after that is the interview preparation. So we'll go through the different elements of setting you up for success during the interview process. So those first 3 sections will probably take the bulk of about 50 minutes to an hour. And then we'll spend the last 30 minutes with the Q&A. So we have 2 fellow Indeedians who are experts in their area going to be joining us. So like I said earlier, don't be shy, pop in your questions. If we don't get to them during this presentation, we will hopefully get to them then during the panel. But to kick us off, we have a quick video here that we're going to share.
Okay, Mark. My name is Jared Barnes, and this is the resume that got me my job with the Los Angeles Rams. When I logged on to Indeed and would read a job description, there were times where I was terrified. It can be really, really hard to express yourself on a sheet of paper. Everything from the design, the language, the color, the setup of a resume is simply a reflection of you. I had a lot of people proofread my resume. I had not only family members, colleagues, but also other professionals in the space. Me applying for the Rams, it's very much a team environment. I was an entrepreneur who had been a CEO applying now for a team role. I wanted to use language that showed, hey, I can play a role on this team. Some advice on how to simplify your resume, potentially starting with an action verb: increase, led, managed, oversaw, whatever it may be, getting to the root of what it is you're trying to articulate, being able to be effective and concise in that. If you think about it, that recruiter, whoever's sourcing your resume, they're probably not going to look at it longer than 8 to 10 seconds. So how can you get across the most important information in the shortest amount of time? That, I think, is kind of one unwritten rule or secret about the application process.
Cool, that was Jared from Indeed. So yeah, as you've seen, quite a long agenda or a lot of content to go through. So let's dive in and start with getting started. So even before you jump into your writing your CV, where do you start? That's sometimes the hardest part is, getting started. So before you make your CV, grab a pen, take a piece of paper, or that iPad and phone again. And we're going to work our way through your career history. So you're just going to sit down and list job titles and companies you worked for. I think that's a good way to start. And you think about every specific experience you had there, the different jobs you did. What skills have you learned there? What skills did you need for that job? You might already think, what was I good at? What did I like? And what needs maybe some improvement? Also think about maybe other trainings you did with work, outside work, maybe volunteering that you did, some organizations where you volunteered. Could be things like shout-outs here in Dublin, but could be your sports club, could be social club, anything like that. That might have brought you some experience that you would like to highlight. So we're looking at hard skills and soft skills. Hard skills are pretty easy there. The list is generally a little bit shorter. It's softwares, it's languages, it's things that you had to learn. The other ones are the soft skills. Areas like customer service, they're often not industry specific. If you have face-to-face or phone experience working with customers, this can be utilized in numerous roles and industries. So that's a transferable skill. Working under pressure, you see that a lot as a requirement in job descriptions. You've worked in a very busy environment. It could be a coffee shop, it could be a bar. That is working under pressure. So tick that off. You have a strong attention to detail. You've worked with reports or data. That are analytical skills that they're looking for. So all these, they're not industry specific. They're not tied to one company. They're transferable. Same with software systems that you use. They're hard skills, but they can also be transferable. Microsoft, Excel, we all know how often they ask that. They're all transferable, but they're hard skills. Again, same, think of all the other things that you've done outside of work. And then as well, if you have written all that down, ask a friend or a family member, like, what do you think of this list? And maybe they see other skills that you haven't thought of that, are really good and useful for your next job. I know it sometimes seems a little bit daunting to involve a friend or a family member, but or someone close to you, but it could come in very handy. So yeah, now you've written out all kind of these details of your history, and you can start doing some research. Also, when you do some research, you can look for jobs, but don't just look for the job titles. Also go and look for the skills. When you go on Indeed or other job search engines, now they're very often skill-based or experience-based. So don't just say, oh, I want to be a retail assistant. Just maybe list the skill or put in a skill that you would like to find a job in. You'd be amazed how many jobs come up. Language, for example. I speak French. So I just sometimes go out of curiosity, just like I put in French to see what comes up. And sometimes I'm really surprised, like, oh yeah, I could do that. I speak French and that's something I'm interested in. So you could try that. Also, while you're looking up these other job and job titles, have a look at the companies. What different companies are out there? Research them a little bit. Because all companies have different jobs. Like here you see Costa Coffee or something. They don't only need baristas, they also need recruiters or other jobs. So have a look what they have to offer, and you'll learn something from there, and you might even reminded of some other experiences you have or other things you did in the past. So yeah, that's your getting started.
Thanks, Joachim. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, there are so many things that we do in our jobs and in our lives today where we're building those skills and those experiences. So like exactly what you said, working in an environment that's busy, it's high pressure, means you're building that skill of being able to prioritize and understand a sense of urgency and what that means. So there's tons you can take away there. So thank you for that. So like Joachim said, we have one section done and dusted. So hopefully now you have a rough idea of what kind of information you should be thinking about before you actually start building your CV and where you're going to find that. So next up, let's get building that CV. So Joachim, I have a question for you. And if you're watching the video closely earlier, you might have got a clue. But how long do you think, on average, a recruiter spends actually looking at your CV?
Yeah, I know it's not very long. We need to stand out in a very short amount of time. We put a lot of work in our CV to make it stand out. So I would hope it's a little bit more, than just a second, that it's like in minutes, but I'm afraid it's very little.
I might have to ruin your day a little. 8 seconds. What do you think of that?
It's very short, so I think we need to work very hard to make that CV stand out in those 8 seconds. That's like the time I spend just scrolling 3 posts on Instagram or something.
Very, very true. Well, good news is we're going to help you do exactly that. So for the building your CV section, we're going to focus on these topics. And like I said before, you're going to hear a lot of information. Take down what you feel is valuable to you, and then the recording will be available. But let's start with tailoring your CV. So a common approach that a lot of job seekers use is to use the same CV when applying for multiple jobs. It's quick, it's easy, it's efficient. Why not? But think back to those 8 seconds. It's such a narrow window. That means you have to get the right information that the recruiter wants in front of them. And the easiest way to do that is to tailor your CV to every single job description and every single job application. It takes time, I get that, but trust me, it is well worth the investment. So how do you do it? So once you've found that role that you want to apply for, pull out that pen and paper again and get the job description in front of you. What we want you to do is look at what experience and skills are required for that job. Because you've done your prep, you can pull out those notes from earlier and essentially start matching them up. See what experiences the job is looking for that you already have in some shape or form. And don't forget those transferable skills. They are important. When planning the format then of your CV, the skills and experiences that align, so the ones that are in the job description that match your own, are the ones that should be clearly articulated on your CV. So as you're listing out each experience, have those at the very top of the list. Because like we said earlier, the recruiter is going to have 8 seconds. They're going to review your CV and a stack of applications, and getting the right information in front of them quickly means they're far more likely to give you a call. Now, next up, we're going to show you a quick video that's just going to highlight some keywords to include and also those ones not to include.
Resumes are door openers. They're your first impression. Good news is you also get the first word. The bottom line is that there are words to include and words to avoid. With my thought leadership and core competency on this topic, you'll be able to think outside of the box and really move the needle. Trust me, I'm a hard worker and it's all in my wheelhouse. Now, if what I just said sounded off, you're not wrong. Half of the words I used are actually ones to avoid on your resume. Don't remember which ones? Those are no-nos. No business lingo, no givens, and nothing too general. Now, I'll show you the words you want to include. Strong action verbs that speak to your value at past jobs. To convey your communication skills, use words like collaborated, conveyed, instructed, performed. For creative positions, get crafty with authored, brainstormed, briefed, communicated, conceptualized. For financial gigs, these pay off. Audited, classified, halted, equalized, dispensed. For sales, these words sound marketable. Captured, conserved, converted, earned, generated. Lastly, for all those tech positions, get technical with words like advanced, architected, automated, coded, deployed. Well, I think that's everything. Remember that the smallest moves are sometimes the smartest. Like and subscribe for more tips.
All right, so now you've got the plan ready. You know what you're going to put in your CV. You know what keywords not to include. The next step up is how to actually lay it all out. So, like I said earlier, we're not here to plug Indeed, but we do have a super handy tool called Resume Builder, and it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's good for 3 key reasons. It's free, it's really easy to use, and you can select either pre-made templates or you can create your own. But regardless of what tool you use, my advice is make your life easy and don't overcomplicate the format of your CV. Again, think back to those 8 seconds. The recruiter wants to see that information, just clear, easy to read, not have to dig through infographics and images trying to find it. So let's get back to basics for the next point. So to kick off the introduction to your CV, there is some key pieces of information that they'll need to have in front of them. Firstly, you can list your chosen name and include your pronouns if you so wish. Your recruiter is also going to need that contact information. So they're going to want to speak with you somehow. So make sure that whatever email and phone number you list is something that you check on a regular basis. And then lastly, a short and sweet introduction can be really useful as well. It gives you an opportunity to summarize and really sell your experience and skills straight away. In this example, you can see on the screen, we have Mary, and Mary has 2 years experience in customer service and sales. But in this introduction, Mary actually does a great job of highlighting that she understands the importance of providing a great customer experience, which we know is important to any business. And she also knows what it means to work to targets and work as part of a team. So she really can show a little bit more beyond what her job titles reflect. And lastly, a question recruiters often get is whether or not a candidate should include a photo of their CV. In my own personal opinion, it's your choice, but keep in mind that including a photo may tap into an unconscious bias, whether with the recruiter or the hiring manager. And I stress that that is an unconscious bias rather than conscious. So generally, I'd give guidance not to include the photo. So Joaquin, any tips on how you've approached that introduction in the past?
Yeah, I found it daunting writing that introduction. I remember, for my job at Indeed, I was writing that introduction. And, I was saying things like, oh, I am good at, and I have experience. And I decided to show it to a friend, see what he thinks. And he looked at it, he's like, you are good at, no, you excel. I was like, yeah, but that's a little bit too much. You don't want to brag too much about yourself, but I think you have to remember that you have to sell yourself and, you have to stand out. So yeah, maybe show it to a friend and don't be too modest in those things. We all know, and then I'm going to put on the hat as a hiring manager, that a CV shows the best of ourselves, but that's also what it's meant to do, show our best selves. So yeah, if we continue, then we got the first part done, the top of your CV. So then let's move on. And then we get that question a lot. How many pages should my CV be? I don't know. I can't tell you. Is it 1? Is it 5? There is no answer to that. Like, there's no go-to on how long your CV should be. But as a rule, or as a rule of thumb, I would think back to the fact that a recruiter is going to spend an average of 80 seconds to read it. So if you have a five-page long CV, chances are they won't read it all. And they probably will only read the first bits. So being the right person for the role is not enough. You need to ensure that you get the opportunity to attend the interview and showcase your skills. So you want to include things that are relevant and the things that are important. And also try and make them measurable. Good and words like that is not always measurable. They're pretty vague. So keep it clear and easy to read. And to your earlier point, Leanne, I think a CV should be simple and not too overdone. So don't overdo that layout. Keep it just simple and straightforward. Now, then you can ask me, now what's relevant and what is precise? So what can I delete? Well, relevant experience and information is the information that add value to your profile. Now, I'm not saying that you should leave out 4 years of experience, but you have to decide, am I going to put in that experience with a whole description of what I exactly did? Or am I just going to say, I worked in Dunn's as a retail assistant from January that year to December that year. And that's it. If the information is not relevant, then just stick to that. If there is relevant information, then you might want to give some more information around the job title. I also always think that, keep the recruiter a little bit hungry as well. They might have questions. So you don't have to write a whole essay of things that you did. Now, on the other hand, if you don't have a large amount of work experience or relevant work experience, then you have to start thinking of your list earlier. What did you do outside work? Volunteers, other trainings, maybe during your education, things that you might want to include that's relevant and that you want to showcase. So let's have a look at a real life example to make this a little bit more concrete. So we know that Mary is looking for a job and she's eyeing up this job. It's a sales agent with a broadband company. In the job description, they talk about what the job is, and then the most important part for you, what experience they're looking for. So they mentioned SLAs. SLAs are service level agreements. If you want to know, Google is always a very good friend for job search because the acronyms tend to fly around a lot and we don't all know them, but Google does. They also mention sales goals. They talk about the focus on customers, now in different ways. And in the experience section, they ask or they talk about needing customer service experience as well, servicing customers over the phone, and they're asking Microsoft, which are basically IT skills. So yeah, that's what Mary is looking at. Now let's have a look at her CV. So Mary has been writing up her CV. She has 2 previous experiences. One as a barista, one as a sales assistant. The job that she's looking at, that's completely different than, or a completely different industry than what Mary was working in before. And it's also phone-based, where before she was customer face-to-face. And so really there's not a big difference, except that it's an office job and the other one was more in a retail environment. Now, if you look at it, she can actually apply for this job because she ticks a lot of the boxes. And let me tell you why, or why I think that she should go for a job. If Mary would be my friend, I'd be like, no, Mary, go for it. I think you have a chance. You might be invited for an interview. So Mary hasn't worked with SLAs before, but she worked in a fast-paced environment. And we often think fast-paced environment, that's the IT sector, but a coffee shop is also a fast-paced environment. And what she did in her CV, she was clever. She put that she served, I think she said something like over 500 customers a day. I think we all can agree that that's fast-paced. So showing that there were around 500 customers a day, that gives the recruiter an idea of how fast-paced it was. Even though a barista wouldn't typically seem like a sales role, in her position, she did have targets on upsell and on daily sales. So another box that she can tick off. Now, in her retail position as a sales assistant, she highlighted that she was a top performer and her experience working to targets. That also, if you want to say that you were good at something, make it tangible. Say that I achieved my goals every quarter, or I overachieved, or I overachieved one quarter and the other quarter I achieved. Just make it tangible when you talk about your experience. So no problem there. Targets also ticked. Now, the job that Mary's applying for, they're also looking for people that are IT literate. And she doesn't have that. In her other experience, she doesn't have that. But what Mary has done is that she's done a web design course or a website design course. If you put that in as an extra, that covers the IT skills. If you can do that, then we all know then that Microsoft tools will be easy to learn as well. So, so as we mentioned, even though experience in retail and hospitality may not seem to be directly linked to the role that Mary wants to apply for, there are elements in both her roles that are transferable. That's again those transferable skills. I'm going to give you some more ideas, but I'm going to leave it to a little video and they'll explain you a little bit more.
Skills. Clearly, this isn't one of mine. But we all have skills that employers want. In particular, they want employees who have the right mix of soft skills and hard skills. Hard skills are technical knowledge or training gained through any life experience in your career or education. For example, if you've worked in food service or retail, you might know how to use a point-of-sale system.
O si estudiaste algún otro idioma, podrías hablarlo perfectamente.
Soft skills, on the other hand, are abilities that can be applied in any job. Think people skills or social skills. These are skills like leadership, lunchtime, problem solving, and organization. Still not sure what skills to list? Here are 10 of the most common. Remember, employers pay special attention to the skills on your resume. Well, I think that's everything. Remember that the smallest moves are sometimes the smartest. Like and subscribe for more tips.
Okay, so we've got the experience bit ticked off, and now we're going to look at the education. Again, a question we receive often, like, do I include my education or not? I'd say you do. You should include your education, but where will you put it? Will you put it first, or will you put it on the bottom? Now, that's a little bit up to you. If you look at the job description and they're asking for a specific education or a specific degree that you have, then I would put it at the top. If they don't, if there's no mention of a specific education or specific degree, I would just put them at the bottom. It all depends a little bit, like what's more relevant or not. If your education is very relevant, put it at the top. If you're looking for position as a journalist and you've done journalism, you see it kind of matches. I would put the education first. Then how far back do you go? As a hiring manager, I generally am not that interested in the primary school you went to. If you have a lot of experience, like if you have worked a couple of years, then I wouldn't worry too much about the secondary school either. If you have further education, but don't put too much on the education. You don't need to go back all the way. And then the other areas that are also worth mentioning, hobbies and interests. It's a tricky one sometimes. Do you include them or not? I would say include them if they're relevant again. It's all about being relevant, and it's all about standing out. So I'll give you an example. When I was hiring for junior sales team, where we're looking for experience, but something like 1 or 2 years, which is not a lot to go by. And it's a pretty competitive environment where they were working in, but also a team environment because they would be split up by country. So in my case, it was for the UK. And when then I see things like, playing rugby and, being part of rugby tournaments, then I'm like, that's a team player, bit of competition. That kind of makes you stand out a little bit more. I would say refrain from including things like I like music, or I love traveling, it's not so relevant. And if you add it, be a little bit more specific. Be specific about type of literature it might be relevant, maybe certain destinations or certain cultures that interest you if you're into travel. But expand a little bit on it when it comes to those interests. Generally, I'd say don't go overboard there. It shouldn't be the bulk of your CV. It should be a small subtitle. So yeah, that's I think the CV covered off mostly. So that makes us almost halfway through today's presentation. Also, don't forget at the end we have an expert panel. So if there's questions that you would like to ask to the expert panel, don't hesitate. They also know a lot and they have a lot of insight, so it might be worth asking those burning questions that you have. But yeah, the main takeaway I'd say for this one is tailor your CV. Don't send a general CV out to anything. Every CV should be specific to the job that you apply for. So yeah, that's it for this part. Leanne, I don't know if there's any questions or if any takeaways from you, Leanne?
I think there's so many takeaways for me. And I think like what you mentioned there earlier about, there may not be a hard rule on how many pages your CV or resume should be. But as you said, really a recruiter is not going to spend, 20 minutes digging through 10, 11 pages. So trying to keep it short and sweet with the key things that are relevant, I think is really good advice. So thank you for that. All right, so now hopefully everyone has got their CV in great shape. You've hit that apply button and you've gotten an invite to move forward in the recruiting process. So we know interviews can be daunting. They can be nerve-wracking experiences. So the key, and you'll see this as a trend throughout our presentation, is preparation. So if you've spent the time preparing and you have a good idea then of what topics might come up during the interviews, it'll make you feel a lot more confident and comfortable about what you want to say and also how you want to say it. So feeling prepared will eliminate some of those butterflies before you dial in to that Zoom interview. So during this particular section of our presentation, we're going to take some key points. So we'll talk about what a recruiting process actually looks like. So if it's your first time maybe for applying for a job, this could be quite useful. We'll talk about those questions that no one is ever quite sure how to answer. And Joaquim's got some words of wisdom there. We'll hopefully help share some tips and get you ready for online interviews, because we know it's a virtual world these days. And then we'll talk about how to actually prepare for the interview itself. So let's kick off with the recruiting process. So a standard process is generally broken out into these 4 sections. Obviously, first is your application. So you've applied with your revamped CV. And after you apply, there is somebody on the other end, usually a recruiter, who's going to review your CV and decide if you have enough of the relevant skills and experiences that they need. If it's a smaller company, it might be a HR manager or it might be the hiring manager themselves who actually reviews your CV. So once you've done that, and if you meet the requirements to move forward, next up is typically a phone screen. And again, usually with the recruiter. But I do want to call out that if you're applying through a recruiting agency, often you'll actually speak with the agency first. So they'll want to make sure that they're forwarding your CV for the right jobs. A standard recruiting screen is typically about 30 minutes. Again, it's going to depend on the actual job itself. But during that screen, the recruiter will usually want to expand on your CV. So they'll deep dive into your own skills and experiences. So this is your chance. This is a great opportunity to really sell the experience and skills you have and really expand on what you've put in front of them. During the call, the recruiter will usually give you a bit more insight into the role, into the company, and hopefully they'll also give you some time to answer any questions. So do use that time valuably if you do have questions. And again, Joaquim has some tips on what to ask later on. After the screens, the recruiter will usually compile what's called a shortlist. So this means they're going to review every candidate that they've spoken with and decide who the strongest candidates are that they want to progress with. Usually a hiring manager will then review those CVs and confirm who they want to bring into the interview process. Depending on the role, some companies might introduce an assessment at this point before the interview. That could be for a language assessment, maybe, if there's an additional language required, or for tech and engineering roles, there can be technical tests. But the recruiter will give you more information about those if they're part of your process. So with the interviews themselves, the recruiter, again, should advise on things like how many rounds there are going to be and if they're going to take place online. But do always ask the question if you're not quite sure. And once the interviews are completed, the recruiter will hopefully follow up with you and either provide some information about the next steps, or if you're unfortunately not moving forwards, some companies will be able to provide you feedback, which I know is never easy to hear. It is heartbreaking sometimes, but it is really valuable. So it can help you understand ways you can prepare better for your next interview. If you're successful, then this is where the offer kicks in. So during that call, the recruiter will discuss things like your salary, the package they have on offer, the start date, what your onboarding process is going to look like, and all that key information. But again, we'll dive into that a little bit again later on. So Joaquin, tell us a little bit about those awkward questions, if you will.
Yeah, there are some awkward questions out there. All right. I'm sure this would be lovely over a pint in a pub as well, but that unfortunately is not possible these days, and it's not the objective of today. Yeah, I've, of course, had a couple of awkward questions in interviews. I also had to ask, as a hiring manager, some awkward questions. And I suppose that's the ones that we're going to try and avoid. Because in the end, there won't be any awkward questions anymore if you're well prepared. I've grouped them around three groups, kind of. So gaps on your CV is the first one. This happens. This is totally normal. We all understand that as recruiters, as hiring managers. You finish one job, you might have a break, you do another job. There is tons of reasons. I'd say in general, as a rule of thumb again, just be honest about it and don't start to make any lies around it. Now, how honest do you have to be? You don't have to give all the details. Like, if you take an example, and it's something that I experienced as well, there was quite a big gap in the CV, and I had no idea why. And of course, when I was looking through the CV, even though for the rest everything looked really good, I did have a question around that gap. Now, it turned out that they took time off to care for a family member. I thought that was, that added to this candidate. I thought it added to his, his attitudes. So I didn't ask any further questions, but he, wanted to explain to me. But if you don't feel comfortable in explaining everything, then you can just stay vague. You don't have to give all the details about who it was and why it was, if it was a family situation or another situation. Just try not to lie, but you don't have to give all the details. But gaps on your CV is something that will come out because it just raises questions, and not necessarily in a bad way. We're just like curious, like, what did you do? Maybe you forgot to say something that is like really important. Maybe you left out some experience, and I don't know, you toured for 8 months with a band as their technician or something. That could be really, really interesting, and that might be really relevant to the job or something. So that's why we ask those types of questions as well. So yeah, that's those gaps on your CV. Career change sometimes go hand in hand with gaps on your CV, but these days we all make career changes. If you look at like very successful people, they didn't start immediately with the job of their dreams. It takes a while to get to your job of your dreams. So you have to sample, as some say, a couple of different jobs. Career change, just explain them, and I suppose you'll have to show maybe a little bit more passion and interest towards the subject that you're going for. From my own experience, for example, I was working in a travel agency and airline industry and in kind of ticket sales. And I felt like a change, that this wasn't really my thing. But what I really liked about my job is working with the software. I thought I just kind of like to outsmart that software, that ticketing system, and I looked everything up, and I was always excited when I found like a new shortcut or a new way to do something, and my colleagues were like, yeah, what, you're going to gain like 2 seconds and you're so happy with that? It's like, yeah, but it's amazing. So then I thought, but who makes that? Who does that software? So I looked that up and so on and so on. So in the interview, I mentioned, what I did before and what I was particularly interested in that job. And that happened to be, the software and all these kind of things. So I got a job as a trainer for that software company because I'm not technical at all. So I couldn't like go in as a programmer or something. But a trainer job was something that I really liked. So, in that sense, you can kind of do career changes. But you will have to maybe show a little bit extra interest and do a little bit more research if it's a career change that you're doing. So yeah, then third one always comes towards the end of the interview. It's also an awkward one, especially for the interviewee. It's the compensation. Again, honesty. It's things you're going to hear a lot today is research and honesty. Look for yourself. Well, research it a little bit. How much will you make for that job? There's tons of resources out there. You can find it on Indeed as well, like kind of indications of what salaries would be for a certain job. Look that up. When a recruiter calls you, you can discuss that. Now, again, a recruiter, they talk to a lot of candidates and they know the market pretty well. Very often they're even specialized in the industry where you're working in. So they will know what you're probably on or in or around that. So don't just add 10K to it and think like, oh, you know what, if I add 10K, then I'm just going to make that in my next job. It doesn't work like that. But what you have to do as well is look at what are your extra benefits that you get in the job that you're currently in or that you were in and that you're going to. Is there a bonus? Is there health insurance? Is there a pension scheme? How much is that worth? Like health insurance for a year, how much is that worth? That's about 2,000 2,000 euros that you would pay here in Dublin for a good health insurance. So, worth counting that in and give yourself an idea of like, what is the minimum that I want to work for? You don't want to get to the end of the whole cycle and then having to refuse the job because the salary is not good enough, or that recruiter has to come back and say, look, we think you're great, but we can't match your expectations. So it's a little bit of time wasted. So do some research on that. And then again, then it won't be an awkward question. Then you're just prepared and you just answer it and there you go. So yeah, that's a bit around these awkward questions. I know it's a lot, so I hope you take down the most important things. This is a bit a new one because for a lot of you that are looking for a job now and trying to get that interview, the chances are that your interview is going to be online, like everything. Like we wanted to do this conference in person, but it's online again. So you'll be doing an interview from the own comfort of your living room or your kitchen or your bedroom. So Leanne, tell us, do you have some, I'm just thinking about all these funny videos that you see of online things. Do you have some tips and tricks for us?
I hope I do. Let's have a look. So yes, Joaquin, you're totally right in the sense of it's a virtual world. It's most likely that you're going to be have an interview via Zoom, an online platform, whatever it could be. So we'll spend the next 10 minutes or so and just talk you through online interviewing and then dive into that preparing for interviews. So first up, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier, is make sure you know how the recruiter or the hiring manager is going to contact you. So understand what kind of medium or platform they're going to use. There is no point sitting there beside your phone 5 minutes before the call when actually they want you on Zoom. So do ask the recruiter up front a day or two in advance and be prepared for this, particularly if they're going to do it on the phone and your battery is anything like mine, you're going to want to have to keep your charger to hand. So once you know what it's going to be, go ahead and download the app or try and log into the platform, whatever it's going to be. And again, you don't want to be panicking 15 minutes before it. So make sure you're trying this a day or two in advance. And if you don't have the right information, if there's a password missing or anything, just reach out to the recruiter and they'll happily help. Once you've logged in, test it out. Line up a housemate, a friend, a family member, whoever it is, and check the connection. Because if, again, your Wi-Fi is anything like mine, it is perfect at 10 o'clock in the evening. But when everyone in my house is on a Zoom call, it's a little bit different. So you're going to want to test it out. You also want to check that your webcam is up and running right. And again, depending on what kind of device you're using, it can change. So if you're going to use a phone, an iPad, something more like that, you're going to want to stand it against something solid. I know we all think that we can hold our phone for 60 minutes and keep it perfectly steady. It can get painful. So do have it leaning against something, because the last thing you're going to want is for your hand to drop and suddenly all the hiring manager can see is your chin. Next up is your room setup. And like Joaquin said, this is something that, we're going to be doing for a while. So being in an environment that is comfortable for you is so important. So find a comfortable chair, comfortable spot in your house, because you're going to be here for 30 or 60 minutes. And make sure there's plenty of light, because what we want is for the hiring manager or the recruiter to be focused on you and not have too many distractions going on in the background. Also, if you've got other people in your home, try and cut some sort of deal so that no one actually comes into the room for those few minutes, if you can. It just helps eliminate any distractions. So even if the interviewer can't see them, you're going to see them. And last up, have some notes beside you. That's not a big deal. You can have some bullet points, jot it down just in case your mind goes blank. What I would say is reading from them directly to the interviewer is a no-go, but having something to glance at is totally fine. And make sure you've got plenty of liquids beside you, because again, you might not anticipate it, but talking for 60 minutes is going to have an impact. So you're going to want plenty of water around. So now that we've got you set up for that online interview, let's dive into some of those tangible ways that you can get prepared. But first up, we're going to show you a quick video from one of our job seekers.
This is how I prepared for my interview to get my job at Squarespace. What better way to apply for a job at a website company than to make an actual website? So I made a one-page website about myself. Once I got the hang of it, I could speak to the product in the interview and actually show them kind of a bit about me, my personality, and my work experience with a website. So of course I researched the company itself, I researched the folks that I'd be interviewing with. I had a friend actually guide me through a fake interview where we just pulled questions from the internet that we thought might come up, which kind of helped me get the scaries out. Before I went into the interview, I did a boxer move, listened to really energetic music and psyched myself up, self-affirmations like, you got this, so that I could really walk in feeling energized. One thing that I took into consideration is just sort of how I present myself, my posture, my confidence. I wanted to make sure I wasn't, slouching and being too casual, although the hiring manager did tell me it was a very casual environment. I wanted to make sure that I demonstrated to them that I was confident and poised and ready for the role.
All right, so you think you're ready now for the interview? You are, but we're forgetting one thing. You need to stand out because you have competition. Otherwise, there wouldn't be an interview. So now is the time to listen and see how you can stand out. First of all, about the company. Research the company a little bit. I know you've already done that, and I know we've already said it. But now that you know that you have an interview, go on their website, go to their store. Not for the moment, but go on their website, because everything is online, bloody online every time. And research. Research the company, research the products they sell, they have, the culture. And when I say products, you might not be able to research the products. Like some products, if it's a business-to-business company, you might not be able to see their products or to know what it is. Consult your network. Does anyone know it? Anyone might use it in work or something. Salesforce, some software company. Ask around. So yeah, even look at their competitors. In an interview, it is okay to mention competitors. It shows interest. It shows that you know the industry, because you're not only going to work for that company, but you're going to work for an industry. When we do interviews at Indeed, we also ask, what are our competitors? What does the recruitment landscape look like for you? What do you think? So that is okay, and it makes you stand out, and it shows that you have interest in the company and in the job. The role, I'll be honest with you, if you look at a lot of job descriptions, sometimes they're a bit wishy-washy. You don't really know what they are, and what is a ninja in this and a wizard in that. It's not always very clear. You can ask that in the interview or at the recruitment stage, but do give yourself an idea of what it could look like for you, that you have a kind of tangible idea of what this job will be. Then, look at what experience is required and make sure you've looked through that. Also, when you had your call with the recruiter and she's explained to you the next stages, ask the recruiter who's going to interview you. And then I don't only mean the name of the person, because you're not going to stalk them on LinkedIn or Facebook, but will it be your future manager? Will it be someone from HR? Is it the CEO of the company? When it's a small startup, that might be the case. But you just kind of want to know who in the company it is, because if you're doing an interview and when you're hired, that person is going to be your boss, you're going to be maybe a little bit different than when this is an HR manager or another recruiter or a colleague. So try and get that information from the recruiter. So that's a couple of tips to stand out. Now, Leanne, we have to show that we're motivated. How can I do that apart from showing up for the interview?
It's always a good start, though. So I suppose the easiest way to think about this is, if you're a hiring manager, you're going to want to hire somebody who shows that they really want the job, that they're interested, that they're going to work hard, that they want to learn. This is just a really key indication for you, especially if you're going to meet multiple candidates. You're going to want somebody who really wants the job. So again, like Joachim said, go back and do your research. Understand things like the company culture. Have a look at reviews, see what their employees are saying. Check out even current employees. They could be in, great jobs, but they might have progressed their career at that company, which means there could be good opportunities for you there as well. If it's due to a career change that you're applying, again, this is a great chance to show why you're willing to take the risk and change career paths. It gives you that chance to explain why this role and this move is really important to you. And don't forget about what you're bringing to this. Again, how does it align with your own previous skills and experiences? What value are you bringing to this company? Because while they need something, you need something, it's a match. You're going to bring skills and experience to this. And then lastly, what are you getting out of it? So again, what are you learning from this experience? You're always going to have a gap. So is there something on that job description that maybe you're not perfect at, or you don't have a ton of experience in? This could be where you're going to learn. What I would like to call out is if it is a key part to the job. So like we said with the IT specialist role, if you've never used Microsoft Office before, maybe try and not bring that up too clearly in the job interview itself. But if there is something on the job description that you can learn, talk about it, and talk about how you've learned before as well, because it gives, again, a really clear indication that you know how to develop yourself and develop your own experiences. But the key to actually articulating all of this is through examples. So Joachim, how can we do that?
Yeah, the famous examples. So by now you've written down a lot, and you probably stumbled upon some examples or some things that you were reminded of that you did in your jobs and that you want to showcase during your interview. Because these days, most interviews are competency-based. So we're going to ask a lot of examples. So utilize past job descriptions and think about those examples that you did in that job. But when you imagine those examples, think about what part it is that you did, because they're going to ask you, what did you do? How did you do in that, in that instance, in that process, in that, whatever experience it is? I'd say write them out, even though you're not really going to use your notes during the interview, but you might remember it once you've written it down. And also practice speaking it out loud. It just sounds better to yourself, and you'll hear yourself talk. You might even catch here or there something like, oh, no, this doesn't make sense what I'm saying. Like, I can't be saying this like that. That'll sound like really silly, or that won't work. Then lastly, one thing that I would like to stress on is you are selling your strengths and experience. So at the end of an interview, there is always going to be a moment where they might ask you, like, is there anything you want to add? Is there anything we forgot to ask? Was there a question that you were hoping to get that we didn't ask you? That is where you just go like, boom, okay, now I'm going to pitch this or this about myself. An example, something that you want to showcase. Just be prepared for that. And don't forget, you're selling yourself in that interview. So you have to sell your strengths. So think back about that little box we wrote on our CV, on the top of our CV. But Leanne, I think you have something to share, like a kind of method on how these interviews questions go from a recruiting standpoint.
From an overall standpoint, I mean, I think, this method that we're going to touch on really briefly, the STAR method, is useful whether you are the interviewee, whether you're the recruiter, or whether you're the hiring manager. So when you're sitting in the interview as an interviewee, you're going to use those examples that Joaquin talked about. But using this kind of method, the STAR method, will help you put a structure on those examples. So the STAR method is a situation, a task, an action, and a result. So with your situation, what that means is set the scene. What was the scenario that you were in? What is the overall situation that you want to discuss? Next up is the task. So what was the goal? What do you actually need to achieve in this situation? With the action, what did you do? And like Joaquin said, we're very quick to drift into the we did this and we actioned this kind of sentence. But the interviewer wants to know what you did. So while it's fine to mention what the team did as a whole, don't forget to really emphasize what part you played. And then lastly is the results. Did you hit your goal? Did you achieve what you wanted to do? If not, that is okay too. This isn't a test. What I always say is there's a silent F at the end of STAR. How did you follow up? If you didn't hit your goal first time round, what did you actually do over the next few weeks to try and achieve it? Or maybe it didn't go perfectly, and that's okay, and there was learnings from it. How did you take those learnings on board and maybe improve moving forward? So there's lots of ways you can structure your interview questions and answers. This is just a really simple way to go about it. But once you've articulated your example, the interviewer is going to want to know a little bit more. So Joaquin, what kind of questions would we expect from you as a hiring manager?
Yeah, I get it now, Leanne, what you're saying. Yeah, so the questions that I would ask is like, okay, you're giving me an example. I'm like, what was the outcome? Was it the decline by that product in the end? Was that launch of that product successful? And then I'll ask like, so why did you do it that way? Like, why didn't you use this or that or things like that? Tell me more about it. I would say don't go too much into detail when you explain an example, because they'll ask the question, tell me more about it. If they're really interested, or if they're like, sometimes I remember as a hiring manager, I'm like, oh, wow, we had a project like this a while ago, and we're actually looking into it, doing that. I'm like, tell me more. And maybe I'm even going to use it for, in my own job, like, you know what, in the other company, they did it that way. So tell me more. What exactly was your part? I said it earlier. Think about what you did in that, because a big project, you won't have done that by yourself. But what was your role? Maybe you oversaw it. Maybe you coordinated it. That's totally possible, but you can't do everything. And then the kind of a bit of a feedback part is like, so in the end, what did you think you could have done better? What would you have changed? What was maybe not so good? We're not perfect, and everybody, understands that. So they'll ask like, what would you change next time that you do it? So yeah, and yeah, they'll often ask as well, like, sorry, what do you mean? So don't use too much like specific lingo or acronyms that they use in work. I know they throw around acronyms these days, but try to keep it understandable, so that maybe talk to your friend or your sister to say like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, see if you can explain it to them if it makes sense. But yeah, so that's some of those questions from the STAR method that I ask. So Leanne, back to you.
Thanks, Joaquim. So one of the last things we'll touch on is development areas or areas of improvement. I know it's a question a lot of people hate getting, so hopefully this will help. So we know some maybe old school managers might refer to it as a weakness, even though we know it's not actually a weakness. But what I will say is there isn't a person on this planet who doesn't have an area that they can develop on in their job. There is always something we can learn on, we can improve, we can do better. Or maybe it's a case of what gap do you have today to bridge between your current job and the job you want? So maybe there's a promotional opportunity that you have your eye on. If you're asked this question again, think back to that job description. What areas did you not tick off? What were your gaps? These are your areas of development. So to be able to articulate this, again, like I said, hopefully it's not the main requirement of the job, because that could be a bit of an uphill battle. But if there is something smaller on the CV or on the job description that you don't have, be honest about it. Set expectations up front. And when talking about your skills, it is great to frame it in a way that you really are self-aware, so you can show that you know you need to develop on something. And like we said before, highlighting how you've developed in the past will give the hiring manager confidence that you can do it again. But I can never say it enough. You're never going to tick every single box on the job description. Don't let that stop you applying. It's only an application. Let's see how it goes. And think about what you can bring to the table, because you're adding value to that role and to that company. So come with that positive mindset will always help. Joaquim, at the end of the interview, what am I going to ask the interviewers?
Yeah. So yeah, we're finally at the end of that interview. The relief of like, okay, this is it. And then the last bit that you should be prepared for. Do you have any questions for us? And as a hiring manager and as a recruiter, I'm sure the same, you kind of expect some questions. It makes you look better if you have questions. Now, if you really have questions, this is the time to ask. But I would always say prepare for some questions, because there's nothing worse than no questions. I'm like, oh, is this it? This is the interview? No, come on, you must have some questions. So things you can ask, start date. And I would ask it in a way like, so when do I start? When will I start? Kind of assume that you're getting the job already a little bit, without sounding cocky, of course, but ask about training and onboarding program. This is also something that shows your motivation. It shows your willingness to learn. It shows that you're prepared, to take on some tasks. Because we were talking earlier about those weaknesses, Leanne, that you said. I always think it's good if you talk about your weaknesses, if you have any. We all have, but when you talk about them, I would also say how you go around your weaknesses. It could be, a method that you applied, or it could be something that you trained yourself on. Like you might not have been good at data analysis, but you did a course on data analysis, Excel, data extraction, and that just shows that you're motivated, that you're interested. So do ask things about training and onboarding. Again, these days, we hate it, but COVID is still around. On-site, remote working from home, what are the conditions these days? How does it work in that company? Also, you can ask about working hours and flexibility. I'd say be a little bit careful here, because you don't want to give the impression that, so on Friday, what time can I clock out and, finish early? Like, that's not the purpose, but you can ask about like what's expected working hours. A last one I would say, and that's kind of one that I like as well when they ask that, is when they ask about the team. Who's on the team? How many people are there in the team? And indeed, it's often like, is there multiple markets on the team, like, or are we just working for Ireland or for the UK? And, how many managers are there? It gives you a kind of idea. And again, it shows that interest in the company. And often a hiring manager is very happy to talk about that because we're all very proud of our teams and we really like our team. So that's something that gets us talking. But yeah, once that is done, then you can kind of relax. So I don't know, Leanne, could you summarize this in like one sentence for the interview prep, or one thing that you'd say, like, if there's only one thing I can remember, what should it be?
Oh, you set me up so well, Joachim. So the last thing I'll say as part of this session is an interview is not a test. Please don't have flashbacks of your leaving cert and having panic attacks about this. An interview really is an opportunity for you to walk in and tell the hiring manager why you're the best person for this job. We know it's not an easy process. We know there's going to be times when you're not successful and you don't get the job, but think about it in a positive light. There is always opportunities that, you can show and demonstrate your skills, and that's what you need to focus on. So again, it's not a test. It is a chance for you to really show why you deserve to be part of this company. So like I said at the beginning of this, we are going to share out some resources. So there is a number of different methods that you'll be able to find the recordings. So they'll be on the community section until Saturday, and they'll be on the website after that. And we'll hopefully be able to share some things out with everyone next week as well. So you will get some emails with some content like this. So we'll include some links to some good tips and advice from us. But that is the end of our presentation section. So I would like to move forward and welcome our expert panel to join us for the next 20 minutes or so. Hi, guys. So welcome. I'd like to introduce Michelle and Dara. So Michelle, would you mind just introducing yourselves to our guests?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Leanne. So my name is Michelle Carpenter. I'm the Senior Diversity, Inclusion and Belonging Business Partner at Indeed. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And my role involves working with senior leaders at Indeed to develop and implement the diversity, inclusion and belonging strategy. I'm really excited to be here with you all today.
Thanks, Michelle. Great to have you. Dara, over to you. Would you like to give a warm welcome to our guests?
Hi, folks. Very delighted and excited to be here. So my name is Daryl Buckley. I'm a senior corporate recruiter with Indeed the last 2 years, and I've been working in the recruitment space for the last 10 years or so. So, very, very happy to be here. I'm very looking forward to the Q&A session and trying to help you guys navigate the recruitment game and the application game.
All right. Thank you, Dara. Joachim, would you like to say any final words before we kick into our Q&A?
Again, you've listened to me quite a bit now. I'm here more as a hiring manager. So I hired quite a lot for sales teams in Indeed here in Dublin. And then, also my experience as a job seeker, part of the LGBTQI community. So I hope to bring some wisdom there.
Thank you, Joachim. So just a quick note again to everyone, please do submit your questions. We have our expert panel here. We'll hopefully be able to share some words of wisdom. So put them in and we'll get to everybody's today. So to start off, I'm going to start with you, Dara. So we talked a lot about, getting your CV to, catch the eye of that recruiter. Do you have any other tips to really make a CV stand out?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd say there's barely a day gone by where we don't come across that in some type of scenario. I have some personal elements that I do like to see in a CV, and I think you guys might have touched that on your presentation earlier on. So I really like to see a CV that's well structured and has some color and graphics in it. I think a lot of black and white CVs that come across a little bit maybe a little bit disinterested, a little bit disengaging, a little bit rushed, don't reflect very, very well. I think there is a false assumption that circulates out there that the CV will only do 10% of the work, and once I get the interview, I'll be able to sell myself. And personally, I think it really works backwards. I think the CV needs to be needs to put your best foot forward and really needs to sell you 90% into the door, and then you can do the remaining during the interviews. So I think really putting a lot of effort, care, attention, and detail into your CV. There's a huge amount of online assistance now for that. Indeed has some really good channels on our YouTube playlist and on our careers blog to help you format your CV and really help it pop a little bit. Some really good things the last maybe year or two are people are embedding video graphics into their CV. So you can do that now with QuickTime, really, really easy. Just put a quick 30-second or 60-second video and embed that into the PDF of your CV, where a candidate can do an introduction of themselves. I really like those elements in a CV. It just makes your CV stand out, and it makes you as a candidate stand out a lot better. So just thinking a little bit creatively, thinking outside the box a little bit, all that type of stuff, I think really, really helps just stand out from the crowd and really help your kind of CV be a little bit more memorable for the recruiter or the hiring manager.
Some good advice, Dara. So we want the right information in there, but make it pop. Personalize it, customize it. And as you said, there is tons of resources out there that we can easily leverage. So it makes that job a little bit easier. Great advice. Thank you, Tara. Michelle, I'm going to move over to you. So we talked a lot today about doing your research on companies, because we all want to apply for a company where we really do see ourselves and we feel like, we might belong there. But have you got any advice how we can actually tell if a company is inclusive?
Yeah, so I think, companies that are doing a really good job in the inclusion space are talking about it. So I think it's really important as a job seeker to do your research, to have a look on the company website, check for any external facing policies or any company pages that they have with regards to inclusion and what they're doing. I also really wouldn't be afraid to check the company's social media and check their company reviews, because you tend to find a lot of commentary on different things when you do a bit of research in that way. And I also think it's really important to use your networks, particularly in Ireland, a small country here. So you probably know someone who knows someone who knows someone who worked at that company. So, have a chat with people and find out what their experience was. And lastly, I would say, when you're in the interview, never, ever, ever be afraid to actually ask the recruiter or the hiring manager what the culture is like. If they have a strong culture of inclusion, the recruiter and the hiring manager should be skilled in speaking about that, and speaking about the employee experience and the overall strategy. So I think, feel really empowered to ask those questions, because, they should have the answers for you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michelle. And I do think sometimes we almost forget how lucky we are to be in a company like Indeed that is, so inclusive and so welcoming. But there is so many companies out there now who have such a focus on their culture, and they know how important it is to have a diverse workforce. So they really put a lot of emphasis on it. So some great tips on uncovering where they are. Joachim, I'm going to move over to you. So as, a member of the community like myself, sometimes it can be tricky about making that decision. Do you come out in the workplace? Do you talk about, maybe your relationship status, anything like that? So have you got any advice, maybe from your own experience, how you've handled that in the past?
Yeah, it's, it's a bit personal. Coming out or talking about your relationship status is a personal issue. So I think before you go to the interview, you have to ask yourself, what am I willing to reveal of myself? What's important to me? As well, think about people that are not member of the community. We don't discuss always our relationship status or our, sexual orientation or gender expression necessarily in an interview. So you don't have to do it. I sometimes feel that because we're part of a minority group, we kind of have to say it. You don't have to. And I think the easiest way that I find it, I'm comfortable to a certain level. I wouldn't really talk about my relationship status in an interview, but I have no problem talking about my sexual orientation. But I wouldn't kind of pay too or put too much attention on it. So I would kind of, drop it in there when you can. But definitely what I wouldn't advise is to kind of start lying or, using pronouns to kind of hide it, because that is not a route that I would go down to. If you then you're hired and then you have to reverse that. So I think again, honesty and what you're comfortable with yourself. Some people are just more introverted and we don't really talk about private stuff, and that's okay. It's not because you're LGBT or any other minority that you have to reveal that immediately.
Yes, completely agree. And we know that, it's a very challenging thing for anyone. If you are, not ready to come out, then there's absolutely no rush. And we know about 60% of people who identify in the LGBTQ plus community are not out in work. So again, I think it goes back as well to Michelle's point, if you feel comfortable, it's an inclusive environment, it can often make it a little bit easy. But to your point, Joaquim, it's very much a personal choice. There is no expectation that you need to. But I think you said it right there, and that if you feel comfortable, there's no harm dropping it in. So, Dara, exactly. I'm going to pass back over to you. So I know many job seekers out there feel like it is a never-ending search, that they're applying for so many roles. They're, getting their CV out there. They're applying for multiple jobs every week, and they're never getting that call from the recruiter. What can they do to help change this?
That's a great question, and that's a tricky one, because I can't help but think back to when I first left college and I put my CV out. I did a degree in financial management and marketing, and put my CV out to all sorts of weird and wonderful marketing roles, and wondered why I never got any calls back. And I think I was, like most recent graduates, under the assumption that, okay, I've got my marketing degree now, the world is my oyster, and I'm going to have so many amazing job opportunities, I'll be spoiled for choice. And I never got calls for weeks, or calls or interviews for weeks. And I think it's quite a tricky one. And my honest and most direct advice would be to make sure that you're applying for roles that you realistically think you have a shot in landing. And understand that role exactly. When I was 2021 applying for marketing roles, I was applying for every different marketing role available: marketing manager, marketing directors, marketing strategic operations, when really I should have been applying for graduate roles or marketing assistant positions, for example. So make sure that you are applying for roles that are relevant to your background, relevant to the years of experience coming in, and roles that are realistic to where you can get your foot in the door, learn some phenomenal systems and processes in a good company, ideally, and try and grow from there. Trying to apply for every single role under the sun is only going to, unfortunately, leave you a little bit more frustrated. So really try and tailor your CV to the role specifically. I think, Leanne, you talked about that in the presentation there. Don't use the same CV for every different role. Really do try and be a little bit more selective, a little bit more thoughtful about the roles you're applying for, and do try and tailor your CV and ideally a cover letter to your role. And the other piece, going back to the video embed thing, which I do think I'm a big fan of, if you were to put in a 30 or 60 second snippet of a video clip of you talking about why you're really, really interested in this role and why you think you do a great job in this role, I think that's another big piece that will make you stand out from all the other applicants that come in for a role.
Great advice there, Dara. Thank you for that. Michelle, I've got one for you. So what do you think would be the best way to address, negative attitudes or homophobia within the workplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think it really does depend on the context and the circumstances. If maybe it's a once-off comment from, a colleague that you're fairly friendly with, or a colleague well, and you think that, it is something that's once off and you feel comfortable, I would suggest approaching that colleague and, telling them how you feel and that you would appreciate that they wouldn't speak like that again. However, I think if what you're experiencing is a pattern of behavior, then that's really when it does need to be escalated, whether to a manager or to HR. It really needs to be dealt with in the right way. We all know that comments, things like that in the workplace can actually turn into cases of bullying and harassment. And of course, sexual orientation is a protected ground in our legislation. So comments like that would be taken extremely seriously. So I would certainly suggest that you would need to escalate that. What I would say is that, quite a lot of companies are doing a great job in educating their staff on, all different aspects of diversity and inclusion. So, hopefully companies are making strides in helping staff to understand, what is appropriate language in the workplace and what isn't. If companies are doing that, hopefully things like that are not happening as much. But what I would say as well is, I think there is also a tendency for there to be a bit of a burden on the community that can be impacted by stuff like this to do a lot of the education. And we saw this recently with the Black Lives Matter movement reigniting in the US and indeed globally, that, suddenly a lot of Black employees and companies were pressured, if you will, to kind of educate all of their white colleagues around them. And, that's quite a lot of burden to put on people. So, I would say if someone has made a comment and you feel comfortable and you want to address it with them, do so, but never, ever feel that it is your job as a member of a particular community to educate someone else on your experience. People should be doing that learning on their own as well, and the company should be facilitating that as part of their strategy for inclusion.
That's great. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate that. Dara, we're getting a ton of questions relating to you as a recruiter coming in, so I'm just going to dive into two of those main ones now. So first up is around compensation. So we know this can be a tricky question when we're in a phone screen with the recruiter. So the question is the interviewer or the recruiter, I'm assuming, able to actually ask what you earned in your last role? Because as you know yourself, sometimes this can put the candidate on the back foot a little bit, especially if they're not really sure what they should be saying in this scenario. So what would you respond, if we're in a position where we're asking, can you ask? And if you are asking, what should the candidate be thinking about in that situation?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think to keep it simple, the recruiter is there's no guidance that the recruiter can't ask what your expectations are. Typically, if they're asking what you're currently earning or what you're earning in a previous role, there's a little bit of a gray area around that. For example, you're not allowed to do that in the US. It's a little bit more lenient here in Europe. But typically, if they're asking your expectations, that is perfectly fine. And I would encourage people to be completely transparent about that, because at the end of the day, that will help the candidate and it will help the recruiter navigate you through the interview process and to an offer you're going to be excited about, which is essentially what the recruiter's job is. The hiring manager typically shouldn't be asking about salary details. 99% of the time, hiring managers wouldn't. The only rule of thumb where that may be an exception is if it is in a small company or a startup company where the hiring manager would typically get involved in the salary and the hiring a little bit more often. They may probably ask a candidate directly what your expectations are. But typically in companies bigger than maybe 20, 30 people, it's more the recruitment team and a HR team that would cover all the salary conversations.
It's great information. Thank you, Dara. And it probably ties a little bit back into as well, knowing how you're going to approach that question about the expectations. So like Joaquim had said during our session earlier, doing a bit of research, understanding what kind of salaries actually apply to different jobs as well, might just put you on a good front as well when you're coming up against that. I've got one more for you, Dara. I'm not going to let you go just yet. So I've seen this in friends going through job interviews as well. I think it can come up quite a lot. But our question in today is, how do you respond when, you're being told that you have too much experience for a job, particularly if it's maybe not the first time that you've seen it?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And that's a funny one. I would typically, if I was the candidate on the other side of the table on that one, I would typically feel encouraged to ask the company or ask the recruiter for a little bit more in-depth detail. So if they're saying I'm too experienced, or I'm too senior for a role, which is perfectly fine to say. I would just like to know, is that role specific? Is that to do with my application for this particular role? Just try and dig a little bit more detail, because there could be maybe, off the top of my head, there could be 5 or 6 other completely legitimately fine reasons for my experience is coming in a little bit too senior for the role, and it's completely perfectly within reason for a company to say that. So I would empower the candidate just to maybe dig a little bit deeper and ask the recruiter or the hiring manager just for a little bit more feedback. Is if my CV or my experience is coming in a little bit senior, that's absolutely fine. But just a bit more information as to why and how, and is there more roles in the future that my experience would be more adequate for, and are those roles coming down the line anytime soon? I'd always try and get dig that little bit more information if you can from the recruitment team, just to give you a better guidance going forward.
That's great. Thank you, Dara. It's always about the feedback. It is so valuable. It's not, like we said, always particularly easy to hear, but it can really help you understand, what the root cause is there and how you can approach that going forward as well. Michelle, we've got one coming in for you. And I know it's quite a sensitive one, particularly, given the current situation, and a lot of people are probably discussing it more, but what would your thoughts be on maybe disclosing any sort of, mental illness or any sort of, other areas that you want to disclose that could be quite sensitive, during the interview or during, the recruiting process? And especially, we don't want to get overlooked then for that job if it is a conversation that you want to have. So any words of advice on that?
Yeah, you're right. It's really a sensitive topic. And again, it comes down to personal choice. What I would say is that a lot of the larger companies out there should have established accommodations processes. So that is reasonable adjustments that they will make for candidates coming to interview who may need them because they have a disability, or they might be neurodiverse, or they may have a mental illness of some description. So if those accommodation processes are there and they're advertised to you by the recruiter or the hiring manager, and you need to avail of them, do, because that is actually a great indicator that the company is welcoming and inclusive and wants to know so that they can help. But if you don't feel comfortable, I certainly wouldn't feel any pressure at all to disclose. I would certainly wait until I was in the company maybe a little bit longer, got a bit established, and then, have a conversation with a trusted manager or someone from HR or someone from the diversity and inclusion team to find out what supports might be available should they be needed. But my kind of rule of thumb is, when you're in a job interview, if it's not relevant to the role and it's not relevant to your ability to do the role, then I wouldn't feel any pressure to say anything that isn't the case. So if you feel that it's not relevant and you're happy enough to keep quiet about that for the moment, then that's absolutely fine.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think you're right. It's such a sensitive topic right now more than ever, given that I think people are experiencing things like anxiety a lot more than they probably have in the past as well. And I like your advice, maybe if it isn't something that's going to directly impact your job straight away, it could be something that you can have, an open conversation with your manager about later on, or maybe a HR partner or DI&B partner as well. So good tips there. Thank you for that. I know we're running low on time, but I've got one there left for Joaquin, so you're not getting off light. So Joaquin, as a hiring manager, how would you answer this question? So we often get confused about dress codes, and particularly now we're going to be on an online world. So if you were inviting a candidate in for an interview, what would your expectation be in terms of, how they're kitted out? It is a suited and booted kind of situation, or what would you advise?
There is no real dress code that I think we should adhere to, but you do want to see someone that's put in some effort, and I think it shows just a little bit of respect if you do an effort to dress appropriately. I would always say as well, try to keep it maybe a little bit neutral. But I don't think people should still arrive in a suit and a tie. But if that's what you feel comfortable in, then you can. But yeah, I just think that you need to be mindful of how you come across, and coming across comfortable is one thing, but you also need to come across professional. And I know these days, there's so many different dress codes. But yeah, I would just say respect, the person that interviews you and show that you did a little bit of effort. It's, in my experience, generally, it doesn't have to be a tie and a suit. But like I said, if it makes you feel comfortable, I know people that feel more comfortable to have this kind of formal talk if they are a bit more formally dressed. And that could be the case for you as well, that if you dress up a little bit, that you just feel that little bit more confident. Confident, comfortable. Just pick what suits you best, and maybe do some research on the company. I have done an interview once, and the end of the interview, they kind of hinted that I had the job, but then she also asked if I wouldn't mind shaving if I started a job, and I had kind of a little bit of a beard, which these days is very common. But so even though I was wearing a suit, it was still. I still got that in the end of the interview.
Congrats, delighted you did. You're so right though, that research as well can help, particularly if it is a very corporate environment. As you say, they might want you presenting yourself in that suit and tie, but I think we count ourselves lucky a lot indeed that, we can show up in a t-shirt and nobody's going to bat an eyelid. Well, look, that's all we have time for today. I know we've ran a little bit over, but I just wanted to say, firstly, a massive thank you to Michelle and Dara for joining myself and Joachim on today and answering those questions. Really great insights. And I hope you all took something away from that. So thank you guys. And as well, a big thank you again to Dublin Pride and the whole team there who put together a phenomenal event over the Winter Pride sessions. So thank you for inviting us. We are absolutely delighted to be here and help out. But like I said, we will share some resources out. You'll find the recordings up on the website. So feel free to share it. And hopefully we'll be again here soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you everyone at iPride and Indeed, and thank you to all of our speakers and panelists over the last 2 days. We've come to the end of our Pride at Work conference. If you missed anything, don't worry, you can watch back the earlier sessions. If you go to the Community Centre section and scroll down, the Community Centre section is going to stay open right through till Saturday morning. So if you haven't seen everything, go in and watch it, share the link with other people who missed it, and they can go in as well. I want to say a huge thanks to all of the crew who've been involved. For our tech crew with Fuel and Lumio, we've got Damo, Shane, Pedro, Amy, Brian and Carol. We've had our wonderful signers, Vanessa, Leanne and Alison over the past 2 days. And of course, Chris and Jamie here in the Pride office with me. We're going to be back in, well, probably a week or so, but we'll have a main event that we'll be back with on the 19th of March to, of course, mark the anniversary of the first march to Fairview Park that gave birth to our movement. Before we do go, I just want to leave a little thought with you, just something to think about. Back in 1969, after the Stonewall riots in November, there was a conference in Philadelphia where the elders of our community got together and a motion was passed, which is why we have Pride in June. As is always the way with conferences, they spent about a day arguing as to whether it would be on a Saturday or on a Sunday. So in the original motion, which is how we have Pride, they put a clause in and they said that this event could change in both location and time. So what I now need you to do is lift your right leg up like this, and then your left, and then like that. Just do that a couple of times. Congratulations. You have just attended the first Pride of 2021. Happy Pride. Now, as is tradition with Dublin Pride, we finish in a certain way every year. So the last thing I have to say to you is, I am what I am. Thank you.
I am what I am. I am my own special creation. So come take a look, give me the hook or the ovation. It's my world and I wanna have a little pride in my world, and it's not a place I have to hide in. Life's not worth a damn till you can say I am what I am. It's noise, I think it's pretty. And so what if I love each sparkle and each spangle? Why not try to see things from a different angle? Your life is a sham till you can shout out, I am what I am. I am what I I deal my own deck, sometimes the ace, sometimes the deuces. It's one life and there's no return and no deposit. One life, so it's time to open up your closet. Life's not worth a damn till you can shout out, hey!